Hello and welcome back to Protect Life here, breaking the consensus. I'd like to thank you all for joining us again tonight. Before we get going, as usual, I'd like to remind you there's a subscribe button, a like button there. If you could click on that, then any new material that comes up, you'll be told about it, anything that we do. Secondly, we have a lot of campaigns, there's a lot of things going on out in the world, even in the midst of this pandemic. And because of we can't do our normal work out there, we rely even more on your help and your generosity. So if you can click on the donate button, anything you can do, anything you can give will be used to the very best. So today we're joined again by Father Paddy McCafferty, who is joining us from Belfast. Thanks for joining us, Paddy. How are you doing?
Doing well, Michael. Good to talk to you again.
Is nice sunny weather up there?
Today has got a bit dull, but it was nice this morning, and it's been lovely the last few days. Beautiful weather, but it's got a bit cloudy.
Paddy, I don't know if you saw it. It made headlines down here. President Michael D. Higgins was commenting on the situation in the north of Ireland, and one of his observations was that it was time for that to end. I don't know if he described it as sectarian or denominational education in the north of Ireland because of the role it has of leaving children with parcels of hate.
Yes, I didn't closely follow it, but I did hear what he had said, and it was reported in some media outlets here.
So I think, first of all, could you just give us a sense of an overview of how education at schools are organised in the north, because it's slightly different to the south, and then maybe his take on his take, shall we say?
Well, there is segregation. There is integrated schools as well, of course. There are already integrated schools. That's the first most important thing to say. And when we have Catholic schools, and then you have the state schools, I think they're called maintained. I forget the terminology exactly that's used, but basically you have three types of school. You have integrated schools, we have Catholic schools, and then there are what we call state schools, which are non-denominational. And there are some Catholics who go to those state schools as well, but most Catholic young people and children go to a Catholic school still here in the north.
But to be clear, I mean, there are there's Methodist College, there are Quaker schools. I mean, there are denominational schools that are not Catholic schools as well.
There are, but I mean, nowadays they are pretty much integrated. I mean, our parish organist went to Methody, and he's doing medical studies now. But so Catholic young people go to places like Methody as well, and Quaker Friends in Lisburn and places like that. It's not quite common and acceptable, So it's not a new thing at all. I mean, maybe we're going too far ahead too soon, but I mean, my grandparents went to an integrated school, back whenever in the 30s or whatever it was, and because the national school system was integrated, and then they would separate for religious instruction. The Catholic children, Protestant children would have obviously separate religious instruction, but they sat side by side with the Protestant neighbours and friends, And what President Michael D. Higgins said is ignorant, utterly ignorant of Catholic education, because we're talking way back when my grandparents were children. The north of Ireland was still an unjust place. It was a divided, bigoted place, and Catholics were second-class citizens. Even though you had integrated my point is that this integrated education did not solve the problem that's in the north of Ireland. It's got nothing to do with education. Catholic children are not taught to hate. It's a gross insult for him to talk in such language as parcels of hatred. Utterly unacceptable and ignorant for a man in his position to say that, And it's typical of a certain mindset, that thinks that, we put all the children together. I would wager, and I'm pretty certain of this, but some of those young people rioting have been to are at integrated schools or have been to them. You can bet your life. I have relations and friends over in the north of the city here who themselves went to integrated schools, And they would tell you that some of the ones they went to school with, integrated schools, Catholics and Protestants together, were rioting and were out in the streets. So it doesn't solve, this is nonsense. The problem is endemic, and it's to do with upbringing and background and everything else, and the structures, the sectarian structures of the North were not solved in the 1930s and 20s by integrating schools, and Catholic children are not educated. The opposite. I never, in my years at school, from primary one up till I left school, did I ever hear any teacher or anyone speak in a bad way about Protestants or Protestantism or anything. I mean, we were not taught to hate. The opposite. We were taught to respect and to love people, who, even if they're different from us,
I just, when I was looking around before we were going to chat today, I noticed that one of the constant themes in reporting about education in the North is that every year when they publish the results of the schools, that in the top 10 schools in the North are very often can be the top 10 schools are Catholic schools.
Oh, yes.
One year was Quakers. And I saw something quite remarkable. The top grammar school in the North was St. Louis in Ballymena.
Yeah.
Top voluntary school was St. Bridget's in Derry.
Yeah.
And the top non-selective school is St. Louise's Comprehensive on the Falls Road, which I think is in a parish just beside yourself.
It's right beside us. It's a neighbouring parish, and a lot of our children go there, to St. Louise's. Yes, and that's, of course, very, very high quality of education is received in Catholic schools, and it's the secularist mindset of President Higgins that this, which is utterly unacceptable, and to make such a gross blanket condemnation of whatever you would say about a whole system of education that is top class, and parents have the right to choose a Catholic education, the right to choose whatever education they want for their children. If they want to send them to an integrated school, they can do so, and many do so, and a growing number do so, and we have special arrangements with those children to prepare them for the sacraments and so on, and that's parents' choice. But what he would deny that the Catholic families who want their children educated in a Catholic school with a Catholic ethos, this is what his problem is, I think. This is the Catholic ethos itself that he objects to, and those like him, of a secularist mindset, But we're not going to take that from him, basically,
We hear the word ethos used a lot.
Yeah,
it's thrown out an ethos. But what would you say in schools like St. Louise's next to you? We've lost your.
Sorry.
There you go.
Got it back.
So I'll start again. We hear the word ethos used a lot. So in a school like St. Louise's, they use I think it's the Vincentian. They talk about it.
Yes.
What is an ethos? How does that express itself in the life of the school? A Catholic ethos.
Well, the whole philosophy and the atmosphere of the school is informed by the faith and by the gospel. It's not just for a Catholic school, religion is not just a class. It's not a subject. It's not just a subject. Everything is imbued with the spirit of faith. Everything that is done with the vocabulary of faith and with the spirit of our Catholic faith. So that is extremely important. It's not just a subject that you teach for 45 minutes. There are religious classes. Religion is a subject. They study other religions, but it's the atmosphere of the school, and it's the way everything, is informed in the school. And the children, hopefully, now we have to be realistic too. It's not always, it's a reality that a lot of young people are not practicing their faith. That's sad, and it's reality. A huge amount don't practice their faith. But, I don't know what the cause of that. That's probably another day's work, But the fact is that it's so important for us as Catholics that everything in the school is imbued with the spirit of faith. So,
sorry, Paddy, I'm just going to. Is there any way? Can you put the camera on something, because it's moving around a lot?
Sorry about that.
You're holding it in your hand, I think, are you?
Yeah.
So maybe you could put it on something.
Is that better?
That's great. Lovely. Right there is perfect.
Yeah. Right. It's okay.
Right. Okay, so I'll start again. So we're talking about ethos. I mean, there's catechesis and there's religious education.
Yes. Yes.
I'm imagining, if we're talking about, in relation to other religions, I mean, we're not talking, you're not doing like some kind of old-fashioned apologetics here, where you talk about other faiths and you compare them and negatively with Catholicism or something.
Oh no, we don't do that. No, but I mean, I think that what's lacking is effective catechesis, because the faith is not sadly being taught or being caught. And I think that's something that we really have to look at. That's another day's work. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't take away from the fact that Catholic school exists specifically to form people in the faith, that they will be people of faith, that they will have a living relationship with God, that they will receive the sacraments, that they will pray. Like that's why in a Catholic school, for example, classes begin with a prayer, even if it's mathematics or whatever it is, or, we begin, well, we did anyway. I presume they still do. It's a long time since I was at school, but we begin class with a prayer. You're living in the atmosphere of faith. You're hopeful that some of it will be caught by those who are being taught, and that they will be formed as Christians, and that they will live in the society and in the culture, living the faith, which is so vitally important these days, because we're living in a very hostile culture. And in fact, I think that this President Higgins he's reflecting some of that hostile culture towards the faith, and the Catholic faith in particular, So does that answer?
Do you think there's a kind of a laziness to that kind of observation as well?
Well, very much so. Very much so. Yeah. I think it's a very lazy comment, and it's an unworthy comment of someone of supposedly intelligent. It's a throwaway. What's the word I'm looking for? Careless, careless comment, careless and lazy. Yeah, and takes no recognition or cognizance of the great work that you've mentioned that is being done in Catholic schools and has been done in Catholic schools all through the Troubles. I would say things would have been a lot worse had there not been people of faith on the ground. I remember hearing this one time, a priest saying that if it wasn't for the fact that the gospel was preached in most of the churches, the main Christian denominations, that this society would have degenerated much worse into savagery. It came close at times, and there was terrible things that happened, but we didn't become, like Bosnia and places like that. God help them. And I would say a lot of that was to do with the formation that people received of faith, that you love your neighbor, that you don't hurt your neighbor, and you don't are offensive to your neighbor. Most people, there are some, unfortunately, who are violent and destructive and so on, but the majority of people aren't, and it has everything to do with how they were educated.
I suppose maybe part of the story is that there was an expectation that after the Good Friday Agreement, which we're a generation on from 97 now, and yet this summer again we've seen this rioting. We've seen, particularly, I suppose, seeing the site with so many really quite young children.
Yes,
from parts of Belfast rioting, and people are wondering, well, what's gone? Surely this should have passed by now, and they're looking for reasons, and say, well, if these children mixed together and grew up together, then these things wouldn't happen. That we need to get across them. That in fact, in some ways, some people are saying that the divides are as bad as they were. In some ways, the communities are less mixed than they used to be. In some, outside of the middle classes are mixing, but but at a class level,
Yeah.
they're not. What do
Yeah.
you think is going on there?
Well, young people will go where there's a bit of excitement. There's a bit of that going on. And they will their curiosity and their sense of want to have a bit of crack, and then of course there are those who are inclined to make mischief and be destructive anyway. I mean, nothing to do with the riots or anything else, but it happens regularly in this area. Destructive behavior, destroying playgrounds, children's playing equipment destroyed, things like that. The cemetery across the way from here, vandalizing graves. There's been a terrible incident there a few weeks ago where the Jewish graves were vandalized and broken.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an element. There's always an element where in any society that needs to be contained, and that spills over at times into violence and destructiveness, and a lot of it is they're using an excuse, the excuse of this sea border thing. And there are certain forces in the community also whipping up tensions. A lot of as you mentioned rightly, a lot of these young people are quite young. I mean, some of them are primary school children, and they're being manipulated and they're being whipped up by by these, some politicians even, being irresponsible with their language and ratcheting up tensions. Like when a politician here in the north of Ireland says this could lead to violence on the streets, it invariably does. Right. Invariably. When a politician says this could lead to violence in the streets, you watch for the violence then to happen. It's not could, it's will. And they're responsible, to some of them, because they can't get on with each other. They can't stand each other, and they're not running the country. Their focus is not the common good, and they're scoring points of each other. I'm talking about all of them,
Sure.
And that's all part of this atmosphere. But having said that, it's not what it was. No way is it what. And even these recent disturbances haven't been what they once would have been. They would have been much, much worse. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, been terrible, much, much worse. It would have went on for days and days, and they would have got. But nowadays, they're not getting away with it. They're throwing the toys out of the pram, and people are just letting the toys fly out of the pram. They're not getting them. They don't give in to them the way they used to. Like they brought the North to a standstill when I was about 11, 12 years of age, whatever, and the UWC workers' strike, and they brought the North complete standstill for weeks, and nobody stood up to them, and the British government gave in to them. But that's not happening anymore. We're going to have to live together, and we're going to have to accept each other.
I'm not saying this flippantly, but I remember back when we were many, many years ago when we were students together, and the lads from the North would enjoy telling us war stories, and we would be aghast and shocked. But I remember several of that saying to me, I have to remember, Michael, that for teenage boys, a riot can be great fun because you license, you can do anything, and nobody's saying that.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, in the context, you've got a pandemic.
Yes.
Everything is shut down.
Yeah.
A lot of you're not allowed to. There's boredom, and then you have this. Is there an element possibly that this is just a kind of a license?
Yes, of course.
Explosion of
hugely
fun to do this.
Yeah, hugely. It's the thrill of the chase. A riot is exciting, and you'd have heard, like, I was never in a riot in my life, but friends of mine tell me that they used to enjoy a riot. That was exciting. And there's a bit of that hugely. That's part of what's going on. A lot of these young kids don't understand. Sorry, one second. They don't understand that they're too young to know anything about the Troubles or anything. Thank God they don't either. But a lot of it is the thrill of the chase and a bit of excitement and a good, charge at somebody and whatever,
Is there work being done still? I presume there is still sort of cross-community stuff about bringing together and
Very much so. There is very much so. The youth clubs, our local youth club, obviously with this pandemic, a lot of things have been scuppered, but most definitely there is all of that going on. And we are a much more integrated society. And President Higgins is talking through his hat, you know? So we are not what we were 50 years ago. This August is the 50th anniversary of the Ballymurphy massacre, when 11 people, Father Mullen and 10 of our parishioners here were murdered, shot dead by the parachute regiment. And that was the Troubles. And that was the beginning of terrible years. And we are not in that now. And it's due to a lot of the great work that has been done, the peace building that has gone on and is going on. And integrating the schools without addressing the core issues is not going to solve it. The schools were integrated before the Troubles. And you still had discrimination, you still had hatred and bigotry and injustice and an unequal society. So that's nonsense to suggest that schools are the problem. In fact, all schools are the solution, because children, I don't know of any school that teaches children to hate. Hatred is taught or caught elsewhere, you know, and sadly in the home, sadly.
Do you think there might be, perhaps an element here of a cynical instrumentalization of a perception of a society where
most definitely, yes,
somebody has an ideological opposition in principle to the idea of religious education and religious schooling, and he's using a context in order to push an agenda?
Precisely. That's exactly what's going on, I'm convinced. You know, he is pushing his own agenda, which is secularist and, against religion, against Catholic teaching in schools and so on. They don't want any of that. And that's their, as you say, that's an ideological control, and it is instrumentalizing for their own purposes a situation, you know. But it doesn't fit, and it doesn't. Their agenda is evident and is very easily exposed, you know.
I just finish up with this. Presumably, if he applies that to the north, he should apply it equally to the south.
Yeah.
I mean, does he believe that schools like King's Hospital or Alex or St. Columba's or Bandon Grammar, which are very fine Presbyterian or Church of Ireland schools, by their denominational nature in the south of Ireland, are somehow inculcating hatred or division?
This is what I think we mean by his remarks are clumsy, careless, and ill thought out and insulting. Yes, absolutely. He's talking through his hat, to put it in layman's terms, you know.
We've mentioned the pandemic, and of course, it's a very different pandemic up north than it is down south.
Yes.
I don't know if you've been vaccinated yet, but if you haven't, I suppose you're going to be fairly short.
I have the first one a few weeks ago.
I mean, the rollout has been very successful in the UK, not quite so much down south.
No.
I saw a photograph of you sitting outside, I think it was outside your church, and you were hearing confessions.
Yes.
I think you probably know that if you're down south, you'll be committing a crime.
Yes, yes.
What do you think of that?
Well, again, I think they've lost the run of themselves. And again, it's this ideological, you know what they remind me of? Surly teenagers who no longer want to go to Mass. The 26 counties government is dominated, I think, by hostile, anti-Catholic, anti-Christian individuals. And that there's a vindictiveness in their attitude to the celebration of Mass and the sacraments. And they are deliberately, you know, they're treating religious faith as like a hobby, which it isn't. It's integral to who we are. It's as important as breathing, you know, worshipping God, celebrating the sacraments, receiving the Eucharist, being able to avail of the sacraments. You know, it's appalling that in parts of this country at Easter time, at Holy Week, we were able to celebrate with restrictions all the liturgies of Holy Week. If I had been in a border parish, half of my parish maybe couldn't have celebrated Holy Week and the other half could have. It's a ridiculous position that they've adopted. It's vindictive and it's grossly offensive, and I think it has to be challenged.
Well, if I can be, I'll push slightly devil's advocate on this. I think, okay, let's allow that some of them maybe are vindictive, but maybe for a lot of them, they don't see it as being, because it's not part of their lives, it's not of importance to them. They don't really see it. They see it as something that people do for an hour on Sunday and after that. And would it not be fair to say that when the restrictions were introduced, there was a kind of a quiescence on the part of, shall we say, the official church? Mm-hmm. And, if you don't get a reaction, if you think, well, this is not important, you introduce restrictions.
Yeah.
The people for whom it is important don't react. Well, then you just confirmed them in their opinion. Obviously, they were right. It's not that important. And it's only a year later that people are starting to kick up. So in a sense, it wasn't unfair of them to take this position because nobody challenged them, or very few people effectively made a noise about this.
Well, I think that we wanted to keep people safe, and we were in an entirely unknown situation at the beginning, the first lockdown, and we were wanting to be very careful. We were worried and afraid for people, especially elderly and vulnerable people, And I think we certainly complied with everything, yes, and we complied to the letter, and we didn't know what we were dealing with, I don't think, and we're a bit further into this now. We're more, we're not as green as we were a year ago about a pandemic. We're a bit more. We've travelled a bit, and there has to be within reason, and we're still very cautious in the church. We sanitize everything after Mass, and we keep social distancing and everything. We do everything as we're required to do. Mm-hmm. And we have never had a problem. There's been no outbreaks, thanks be to God, in this area associated with the church. There have been a few churches, where there have been problems, but they're very few. And it's not to justify what the attitude what the Southern government are taking, and it comes across as vindictive and aggressive, like guards going into churches and stuff like that. It's just hard to understand.
You think that, in the sense of the church, of the hierarchy, are caught in a problematic position where, first of all, they want to be good civic.
Yes.
Secondly, it's very much part of Catholic moral theology, moral philosophy, is the importance of the common good.
Yes, exactly.
And also the rule of law, the respect for the rule of law.
Oh, yes, and he wanted to try to balance all of those, and I think it was right to agree to lockdown and have Mass online, and we thankfully we have a webcam in our church, and people were able to follow along with that. But it was bizarre celebrating Mass every day in an empty church, And last year, the Easter liturgies, the Holy Week Triduum, on my own with no one in the church. It was bizarre. Thank God this year we had a congregation, the safe number that we were allowed in the church, but the people in the south couldn't do that because the government wouldn't let them. And I think there is balance, balancing things out.
I don't want to draw parallels because that would be very unfair, but I was struck by the language. I was reading recently an article written by Liam Bergen talking about Father Rajiv Ghani. I don't know if you remember him.
Yes.
He was
yes, I do indeed, yes.
He was in the Irish College, and he served in the Diocese of Ossory for a while, and was martyred because he wouldn't close his church. And he's known as I think he's Father Ghani of the Eucharist, in fact.
Yes.
Centrality of the Eucharist to the Catholic. If you were speaking now to somebody and trying to explain to them why celebrating at distance is a poor only a poor substitute. That if you're trying to explain to them why, say, the Sunday Eucharist, the Sunday celebration, is so important, not just to you as a priest, but to the Catholic, to the Christian, how would you go about that? And it's a bit unfair to ask you maybe off the top, but to try and have a go at explaining how central this communal worship is.
It's so central that you would die for it. You would die. You would lay down your life, as Father Raggi did. They told him to close the church. It was hostile forces, anti-Catholic, anti-Christian forces. And he said, I can't close the house of God. And it's so central that you would die for the faith. That's how important it is. Now, we're not dealing with hostile gunmen as he was. We're dealing with an invisible enemy, the pandemic. And we're trying to protect people against this virus. But the faith was never meant to be online. It's very, very, very much a second, third, fourth best. We are meant to gather to worship in community, to worship God, and you can't receive Holy Communion via a webcam, and you can make an act of spiritual communion, yes, of course, but that's only until you can receive. Mm-hmm. And when we are like the pandemic was extreme circumstances. It was an extreme reason, and it was to protect life, to save lives, and especially vulnerable lives. We believe in the sanctity of life from conception to natural death. And so it was part of our response to the emergency of the pandemic was to go online only and to close the churches and so on. But you have to balance all that out, as what I said, So we're not meant for online worship. We're meant for communal worship, to gather as the people of God, to receive the life of God in the sacraments, and especially at Mass. So it's so important that you would be prepared to die for your faith. That's how central it is. It's not a hobby. It's not like being interested in gardening or something, whatever. It's who you are. It's the core of who you are. And you cannot, for people who have faith, we can't live without it. When the early Christians, they said about they were being threatened and they were under persecution, and they said, but without the Eucharist we cannot live. We cannot live without the Eucharist, and therefore some of them they died for the Eucharist. And you have it in our own country, and that's why these laws in the South now, the penal laws, it is like the penal laws again, where people are penalized for going to Mass and fined and so on, and priests are threatened not to celebrate public Mass and so on, and guards storming into churches and all that. It's echoes of what happened for 300 years in this country. But let them take note, it didn't work for 300 years. And it's not going to work now either. Micheál Martin and co. It won't work. We will find people of faith will not long accept. Okay, we did accept, and we had to for a while, and we would do it again if it became dangerous. We would go back to protect people. But you have to weigh all this up. Mm-hmm. I mean, can go. I was earlier in a supermarket, and there's people are observing their distance and all that. So why can people not go into church, where people are very conscious and are observing very carefully every precaution,
And is the community aspect must be important? I mean, also just for yourself, and it's not. I don't want to reduce it to a sensation or to a feeling, but your own experience of celebrating Mass in a church which is empty, as opposed to celebrating it with a congregation. What kind of a different experience is that for you?
It was very strange. Bizarre is the word. Surreal. I mean, it was the Mass, of course, and I celebrate Mass, of course, every day. Mm-hmm. And very, very occasionally, when I didn't have a public Mass, I have said a private Mass. Not often that you wouldn't have a public Mass, but if I didn't, I would celebrate a private Mass by myself. But this was in the church, scheduled Mass with no congregation. And what I would do is there was a little green light on the wall, which is the webcam, and I would focus on that. But I had never before in my life preached to an empty church, and it was really surreal, and it was lonely. I have to say, it was quite lonely, and I missed the people. I missed the congregation. We all know each other, and we know where everybody sits and all that, and you missed everybody. It was awful lonely, and they were lonely. They missed being there, you know. They wanted to be there, but we couldn't at that time. And you know, we're please God, we'll never have to close the churches again, and this pandemic will, you know, become controlled, you know. But we're trying to do the best we could for everyone, and without trying to balance everything up. But the South, I mean, the 26 counties, is the attitude and the mentality of some of these in Dáil Éireann, you know, who are anti-religion. Let's face it. I'd say they would keep the churches closed permanently if they could, you know, but they won't be able to. They're not going to be able to do that. And I think there is a challenge going on, as far as I know, and hopefully they will be. As other countries, like Scotland, was taken to court and they were told to open the churches, you know.
Well, that's happened across the several places in several
Right.
Here,
yes, France, I think as well. France,
yeah, France and parts of Europe, but here it keeps getting pushed down the road.
Yes, exactly.
For whatever reason,
Exactly.
the court seems.
Well, you know, maybe the leadership needs to push it, really push it, you know, and not tell we're not accepting this. This is an unjust treatment against people of faith, you know, and it shows ignorance of what faith means to people, and we can't accept that. We have to challenge that.
Well, just before we go, returning to the previous, slightly to the previous thing, the writing seems to have calmed down for the time being. We're moving into summer, hopefully. And,
yes.
you know, so it's traditionally a time of tension. Do you have concerns for this summer? Do you think that there may be problems?
Well, yes, there's always the possibility of what we were talking about earlier, of bored youngsters, you know, making mischief and wanting a bit of excitement. You know, that sometimes can happen. But, you know, I think this will pass. And we have come too far as a society. And we're not what we were 30 years ago, or when I was a kid growing up, when everything was really dangerous. Like, it was really, lives were being lost every day, you know. And thanks be to God, we're not in that position. Like, okay, there's this shouldn't be happening, and it's disgraceful. And the communities need to take a hold of it and stop it. But I don't have the fears that I would have had even maybe 10 years ago. I'm hopeful. I'm hoping that common sense will prevail, you know, and good there. And there are a lot of people in the both communities, all the communities, who are level-headed and who are working quietly behind the scenes to bring an end to the nonsense that we've been watching. You know?
That doesn't make good newspaper stories, so I suppose.
No, it doesn't. No, and it doesn't. It doesn't, and it doesn't fit well with President Higgins's outlook either. You know.
Listen, Paddy, thanks again for joining us. And
yes,
I'm sure we'll be talking again sometime soon. We may even see you down here in the strawberry fields.
I'm looking forward to that very much. Very much, Michael. Yes.
Thanks a million, Paddy.
God bless. Take care. Bye.
And I'd like to thank you all again for joining us. Again, I'd remind you to hit the old button there, subscribe, and again, if you anything you can afford to help us to donate, we can promise you it will be used to our best of our ability to defend those life values that we all share. Until the next time, mind yourself and stay safe.